Hi guys, Ollie here from Service Interval. I've got Gareth with me today on human factors. Um, we're going to have a little bit of an interesting conversation on some teaching concepts and how I think diving could move forward and diving tuition could move forward with some of the concept that Gareth teaches. Um, before I let him do his intro, I've known Gareth for quite some time, and the first time I heard him talk was absolute donkeys ago, before he had any online presentations and books and what have you at Tech Dive USA. So, Gareth, could you just do us a real quick intro for those of us that don't know what you do, who you are, where you came from?
Yeah, sure. So my sort of background, where I come from, is because of my military aviation background. So I spent 25 years in the Royal Air Force. I was a flight instructor on Hercules transport aircraft. I then went off and did a number of different staff tours. So did some flight trials work, some research and development work, some systems engineering requirements management. And then in 2015, I left, worked in the oil and gas industry, teaching human factors, crew resource management. And it's about the same time I got involved in trying to bring this into the diving space. I'd had a near miss in 2005, wanted to share that story, found it really difficult to get that across. And then over the years, 2016 is when I first taught sort of face-to-face programs. And that's when we met in Tech Dive USA, and I gave a presentation about incompetent and unaware. And
Of course,
that
I attended
was
that.
yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
it's got people thinking. And a lot of what I try to do is bring challenges to get people to look at the world differently. And since that time, probably 500 people plus face to face, about 2,000 people online training, put a book together, put a documentary together, and I've now got 14 instructors teaching this material globally.
Wow. Wow.
And it's just building on the experiences from high risk industries and translating it into the diving space
Cool.
to ultimately so people can have a better time, the instructors are more effective, and we have a safer diving industry.
Yeah. So from where I'm sitting, I've heard people say, "Ah, there's Gareth again. You know, who is he telling us how to teach?" Um, a lot of negativity. No, not a lot of negativity.
Oh, it probably is.
A diminishing amount of negativity, but over the years, a lot of negativity
Yeah.
about who is this guy telling us how we should be teaching, right? And which is really interesting because if we look at the evolution of dive training materials, um, compared to other industries, it's very, very slow. So, from your point of view, like looking at bringing concepts into a dive industry, and dare I say it, it's in some areas a fairly uneducated
Hmm.
professional industry. How do you deal with continuous criticism like that, and knowing that you have something of value to bring? How does that work?
Have a very thick skin is a lot of how it boils down to. And it's this recognition that what I'm doing is bringing stuff from established high risk
Uh-huh.
industries about how to operate safely, how to create a team in a training environment. This idea of crew resource management or non-technical skills. Often, the diving industry focuses on technical skill acquisition, so buoyancy, trim,
Yeah,
propulsion,
yeah,
laying line, and it's done, in my perspective, in a very compliance focused manner. So you have a training system that has standards, and the student passes the class when the standards have been met. But that may not be about teaching the student how to dive in the real world. And if you
mm,
look at the instructor training programs, it's about how to teach instructors how to teach a class, not necessarily how to teach a student how to dive in the real world. And
gotcha.
so there are very formulaic processes in place that says you've got to use certain words, you've got to follow certain structures. Now, that works really well when you want to scale quickly and you want to get stuff out there. You have a very standardized process.
Mm,
But the real world is not standardized. And that means that our instructors need to have experience to understand what's going to happen in the real world so that they prepare, or their instructor trainers prepare their instructors to deal with an uncertain or an unexpected situation. And it's this piece that actually there are many things that happen that go wrong that don't get talked about because we don't have a culture of sharing stories. When
Yeah.
people make
Yeah.
mistakes, we often focus on those individuals. They go, well, they should have just followed the standards. But sometimes the standards are in conflict with each other. So we've got to understand that gap between what's written down and what actually happens. And, my perspective is there's a lot of stuff that happens down at the sharp end from the instructors delivering classes that the agencies either know about or and don't want to talk about, or they're blind because there isn't the feedback mechanism that's
Mm,
happening. So
mm.
what I'm trying to bring is very much a systems view as to improve the quality of training at the sharp end. And then when the divers move from the training system out into the fun diving world, then actually they can carry that mindset, that culture forward.
Yeah. I would very much resonate with that. And talking about storytelling, I was working with an existing recreational instructor wanting to attain some technical instructor levels. Um, and that his skills were fine and his teaching ability to teach the skills were fine. It was all the other stuff around it that was weak. And I resonate with what you're saying. So one of the things that I always work on either with students or instructor candidates is not just the individual skill, but how can we solve problems as a group? How can we avoid
Mm-hmm.
problems? And one of the things I did to him over the weekend is I gave all the students, the traditional way of doing it is like you brief a skill, then you have a chat with the student, say, you're going to do this wrong, see if the instructor catches it, then gives the
Mm-hmm.
feedback, and then you give the instructor feedback, which is a little two-dimensional. So on top of that, I gave them other role-playing characteristics that developed throughout the weekend. So the one guy
Mm-hmm.
that had an issue switching to his long hose continued to have that issue because it's
Mm-hmm.
more realistic that way. And what I did is I created a whole scenario of small problems that individually really weren't much of an issue and easily missed. But when a certain scenario took place, they all perfectly fell into place and created an absolute catastrophic nightmare for the instructor, which in reality would have resulted in an incident. And I
Yeah,
use that as a teaching model. And I feel that sort of thing is absolutely drastically missing from diving education.
absolutely. And I think one of the reasons for that is because your skill set for your instructor trainers and your course directors has to be much higher. And the
Mm,
same thing for the instructors that are out there. If you're teaching a formulaic process of do this, do this, do this, here's the steps, the real world doesn't follow that. And you've got to create dynamic situations where
mm,
the instructor has to problem solve. And that means that there is not necessarily a right or a wrong. Well, there might be some wrong ways of doing it, but
mm,
there are different ways of skinning a cat.
yeah.
And I know when I develop my instructors for the human diver, I always use live students in the class for the instructor development process,
Mm,
because the instructors are never going to behave like real world students are going to, especially in the simulated environment we've got.
yeah.
And I think in the same thing with the diving environment, where you have an instructor development class, an IDC or an ITC, whatever it is, that formulaic process where you have multiple instructor candidates pretending to be difficult students, they're never going to behave the same way. And there's also a bit of, you don't want to drop your mate in it
Yeah.
when you're running
Yeah.
through an IDC
Yeah.
and make it difficult for them,
Yeah.
because they know they're going to make it difficult for you. So it's this piece of, yeah, tick, 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 right, now we've
Yeah.
finished the IDC,
Yeah.
off you go. And then those those graduates, the first open water class they teach, or the first DSD or whatever, they see the real world and go, oh my God,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
not what it was like
Yeah.
in an instructor development class.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Um, and I resonate with you. When you're using existing divers or even existing instructors to role play, they switch it on and off, but there's no consistency. Which is
Mm-hmm.
what I try to do is I try to give them a character, and this is
Yeah,
where they're at. This is their strength. These are the weaknesses. So they play the character throughout the weekend, and it becomes then, in my opinion, the instructor trainer's job to um, give them problems that fall in line with their character, and build an overall scenario. But that makes the instructor trainer's jobs 10 times harder
absolutely,
because there
absolutely.
is no material out there to support people doing this at all.
Yeah, and one of the things, sort of the understanding where this comes from is that we've got to be able to recognize patterns developing and then solve them when they occur. A lot of diver training is about, here's a flashcard, execute the drill. So what we do is we teach divers, teach instructors how to problem solve when the problem is in front of you. And now you move, in police terms, they talk about right of bang. So the shooting has happened. How do you resolve it? What we're not looking at is left of bang, is how does that situation develop? What are the cues and clues? What's the tacit knowledge that experienced instructor trainers have that they can pass on? And that's really difficult to pass on tacit knowledge, because you have to have a scenario that triggers that thought process. And a conversation or a case study discussion piece can do that. But in a class, when it's all running smoothly, it's really difficult to think about problems that you've encountered personally.
Yeah. Okay, so how do other industries deal with these problems? In an educational sense, I mean.
So in educational sense, that I would say the established ways, you go and do a training needs analysis, and that basically says
a training needs analysis.
A training needs analysis.
And what is that?
And what you sit down and goes, what do you want my graduates to be able to do after the class? And that's not just about technical skills. It's about problem solving. It's about communication. It's about potentially operating as a team. And so you sit down and you break down this set of requirements. And once you've done your training needs analysis, you sit there and go, right, what are the tools and processes that I need to put in place? And then you start taking these building blocks and you put them into scenario-based training. And the high-risk industry is now using evidence-based training. What is it that people are failing in the real world? And then how do you go back? And how do people fail when delivering training with quality management systems that are there? And I think that's another piece that's lacking, is an effective quality management system where instructors are able to teach without anybody coming back to them and doing revalidation, practical revalidation with fresh students, as opposed to sit there with an instructor trainer and go, demo these skills. It's not about the technical skill. It's about problem solving and running a class in real time.
Because demoing the skills would be like literally the most rudimentary way of assessing some degree of competence. And if there was any question about that, then, oh my God, how about the rest, right?
Yeah, oh, totally. And so we don't have performance-based metrics that exist in the training system.
So other than the BZAC incident reports, is there any reporting that you are aware of from both students, instructors, instructor trainers back to the agencies to establish what is actually needed to move forward?
The agencies have got their own internal quality management systems. And, I used to be involved in one of the training agencies for about 3 or 4 years, and I saw all of the quality control forms that came through. And that agency had a 100% QC process. And one of the things that I instigated was actually the feedback was then provided back to the instructor. Okay. So if something wasn't quite right, or if it was positive, the instructor would get immediate feedback to say what happened on the class. A lot of the training systems that are there, the report goes back, and it's often seen as a defensive thing rather than a learning opportunity. Anything that's critical is a learning opportunity. Yeah. And often there's this piece that says, well, if they're not following the standards, then what they should do is just follow the standards. Well, if people are consistently failing to follow rules, then it's not a rule. It's not an individual issue. It's a rule issue that needs to be addressed. So reporting systems themselves, I mean, I've just finished a master's degree looking at storytelling. And one of the things that came out of that is divers don't know how to tell a learning story. They focus right in on the close things about, I just finished a diving fatality report, and they're looking at hyperoxia or hypercapnia, so an oxygen seizure or CO2 hit. And that's what often people focus in on, is the stuff in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour of the event, as opposed to the system developing in the way it did. And that certainly doesn't happen in the diving industry, is looking at systemic failures. So go back to the thing, British Tobacco Club report, yes, you've got those. But on average, there's only about 150 words goes into a British Tobacco Club report event. And the training agencies' instant reporting systems are like a black hole. You report something, it disappears into the black hole, and very rarely does feedback happen.
Yeah, it might turn up in an Excel sheet somewhere.
Yeah, and so it just
Yeah,
then people sit there and go, what's the point of reporting this? If I've shared a story about something gone wrong and something isn't working and nothing gets done, why bother doing it?
yeah. Have you never thought about setting up an independent platform for these sort of things?
So I have in the past, and there is something that's still floating out there, DISM's Diving Incident Safety Management System. But actually, the technology is not the difficult piece. It's the cultural
Yeah, the shame,
attitude
right?
to. Yeah, well, yeah, it's
Yeah,
that, and that's again what the thesis was about, and understanding these barriers to storytelling. And part of that is the agencies don't talk about incident reporting. So when you're in as a diver and something goes wrong, do you know what reporting mechanisms are out there? The Divers Alert Network in the States have got their own incident reporting system,
yeah,
and they don't have very many incidents. Considering how many divers are out there and how many events occur, they don't get that many come through. And so,
yeah.
really, it should be about the quality of a report. And it's something that actually the British Diving Safety Group, so Tim Clements, who you know, Tim and I have just put together the first podcast that we're going to be putting together for the British Diving Safety Group. And it'll be called Lucky or Good. And the
Yeah.
idea is
He did.
about,
He did tell me.
yeah, and so it's about
Yeah.
getting these stories. And there is an aspect of luck in many cases, and there's nothing wrong with that. What we have to do is be careful that we don't ascribe that luck to being skill.
Mm.
And that requires us to reflect in a safe and trustworthy environment.
Okay. All right. I was going to ask you about your concept of failing safely. So I'm not
Mm,
sure if I understand it in the way that I should understand it, but I think I use the concept a lot. Let me just tell you what I do, and then you can
yeah,
critique
yeah,
me
go
whether
for
it's
it.
right or wrong.
Yeah.
So I feel that if I'm teaching someone and say, well, you need to do this skill that way because it says so in the book, or because that's how I was taught, and you need to do this skill that way. I don't try to teach like that. So what I try to do is I try to teach them the rudimentary skills. Then I try to set up diving scenarios where they may succeed, may
Mm-hmm.
not, more often than not fully succeed, and it brings a discussion point afterwards. Because what I want them to do is I want to coach them to making the decision that doing the skills the way I taught them actually has a benefit to them, because it provides them with more solutions. It provides them with a quicker answer, quicker fix. It works better in a team diving environment. It creates more backups, etc., etc. So the way I understand the concept failing safely is, as an instructor, as an instructor trainer, trying to create a scenario where things are going wrong, except I can pause or stop that because I've created redundancies and backups and
Mm-hmm.
etc. etc. Um, but in the team's mind, they haven't dealt with it quite right. And they have run out of gas, for example. Not really, because they
Yeah.
take backup gas, but creating a scenario that, if the instructor wasn't there, if they were left on their own, would have had a bad outcome. But because there's a safety net in place, they can go to the pub afterwards and talk about it. Um, and then that's where the coaching takes place. So let's do this again tomorrow. What were the actual failing points here? What were the decisions made here that led to this outcome and not that outcome? And how are we going to do that differently? So to me, failing safely is, okay, they've screwed up, and
Mm-hmm.
they're aware of it. And it's not an individual performance; it's a team performance. They've screwed up. They know all the individual skills, but they didn't apply them right in the right order, or perhaps they neglected something early on that then came back to haunt them afterwards. And now we're going to take all of that and redo it, make different decisions, better decisions, earlier decisions, more team-based decisions that will give them a safer and more consistent outcome. Because if the outcome isn't consistent, I guess then, some of it be summed up to luck rather than skill.
Mm.
So that's my understanding of failing
Yeah, yeah.
safely.
So it absolutely, it's spot on. It's about creating an environment where people can fail, and when they fail, it's not catastrophic. And
Mm.
that failure is not just in the technical skill piece. So you talk about putting a safety net in place, having a dive master with you, to basically another set of eyes with you, or you've got the experience that you know what a likely branching process is going to be. You've introduced a little failure and another little failure, and you can see where the dots are joined because you've planned
Yeah.
your failure
You're
process.
watching the domino almost.
Yeah, yeah, and you
Yeah.
sit there, go, yep, right, going to see this is going to happen. Right, they've done that, and then because you're experienced, if they choose a different fork in that path, you've now got to quickly think ahead and say, can I still get the same learning objective out of this?
Yeah.
And so, if they do run out of gas, then, or they've got an emergency situation, you're able to predict what's going on. And then you can prevent it from, say, a rapid ascent or genuinely out of gas or entanglement or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I describe it as quite a macabre piece. You give somebody enough rope to hang themselves, but don't kick the chair out from underneath them. And it's that bit that says, actually, you've got to create that
Yeah, but
environment.
more often than not, they struggle and then they top of the chair themselves anyway.
Well, and so that, from a student's point, from an instructor point of view, is jumping in just in time, and that's really difficult as an instructor because
Yeah.
you've got to let them learn how to fail safely. But it's also, so I said about the technical skills, it's also about the social skills. So it's this recognition that they can discover those failures themselves in a psychologically safe environment, that actually nobody goes into a class with the goal of screwing up. The instructor doesn't go into the class with the intention of screwing up. And so actually one of the easiest ways of creating that psychologically safe environment is getting instructors to talk about a mistake or a problem they've had on that dive themselves. And that might be, when we were doing that drill, I wasn't quite positioned and I didn't see what was going on. And therefore I had to fill the gaps in my own experience.
Yeah.
And what we're doing now is reducing that authority gradient, that this pressure that says we want the student to speak up and challenge. But as an instructor, you're held on this pedestal. And they look up at you and go, oh my God, Ollie's awesome. He's going to do these things. He's not going to make a mistake. Why not? Ollie's an instructor too.
Exactly.
So if you can create that safe environment psychologically, then you can get people to tell their stories.
Yeah.
And your process, you talk about, I describe it in my classes as guided discovery. So in an early team maturity, the instructor takes all the decisions. At the start of a class, you make all the decisions and the student does what needs to happen. As the class progresses and the team matures, both in teamwork and competency, you take a step back and now you're giving them prompts and they can discover themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That takes longer and it takes more skill on the part of the instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to the problem of instructor development. It's dead easy to have a didactic, autocratic, do this, repeat, off you go. But actually what we want to do is students to produce results, not reproduce them. And that's a different mindset.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a whole different skill set. And one not really taught in our industry. And if you want to translate that to an IT level, teaching an instructor, again, a whole different skill set. Courses end up longer, more in depth, and therefore more expensive.
Yes.
And that's maybe something that the dive industry isn't ready for. I mean, you're posing a real problem here, in the sense that unless this is introduced from the top down, I don't see how we're going to bring this into the dive industry as a concept that is practiced by all, at least at a small level. So you've mentioned you worked with one agency before. I'm not going to ask you which one that is. So when you speak to diving agencies, and don't take me the wrong way, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes people hear you talk and see your material and they go like, "Oh, we don't need him to tell us how to teach," right? And I think the point's missed. It's not you telling people how to teach. It's looking at existing frameworks, concepts from other learning environments that have value and could have a lot of value in our industry. So when you're talking to different agencies, rather than getting lip service and going like, well, just put a human factors course in, if people want to take it, people want to take it. How do we go from where we are now? And you might not have the answer, but how do we go from where we are now to introducing some of this experience-based teaching, role-playing scenarios that create, in my opinion, a lot more solid learning environment than just doing some skills and well done, you've done the dive and didn't die, right? Sort
Hmm.
of scenario. I'm talking more about deeper
Yeah,
technical
yeah.
stuff. Yeah, but how do we go from where we are now to having agencies recognize that this is not just a plus but a requirement?
So in my presentation at Rebreather Forum 4 last April, nearly a year ago now, actually,
Mm.
one of the slides I put up and said, safety is not a numbers problem in the diving space. It's an ethical and a moral problem. And by that, I mean, and I put on the slide, there aren't enough dead people to make a difference. There aren't enough dead divers
Yeah.
to make an emotional difference. And one of my tutors at the university said, for change to happen, there has to be a politically significant event. So in the high risk industries like aviation, there's a whole plethora of accidents that occurred. In the nuclear industries, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl. In healthcare, there's a whole bunch of those as well.
Mhm.
Oil and gas was Piper Alpha and then Deepwater Horizon. So each one of those has got a very emotionally significant thing that's happened that's created a trigger. In diving, it's not happening. There's probably about 200 people die a year diving, and that's just in ones and twos, and it doesn't have an emotional trigger. So that's one of the things there is, what's the purpose of change, or why do we need to change? In the diving space, you need to think that the training agencies are separated from what happens outside of the training environment. And they're very much interested in the market share. And so when I've spoken to training agencies, they said if we put something in place like this, we lose market share.
Mhm.
And, where one of the training agencies has a currency for their rebreather instructors that they only need to teach a class once every 2 years.
Mm.
And it's like, that's not enough time. If everything goes fine, cool. But actually, the need for the skill of an instructor isn't when things go well. It's when things hit the fan. And now you've got to problem solve quickly and you've got to resolve that. And the argument was, if we make it more than that, we will lose market share. So
Yeah.
there's a huge commercial
Yeah.
element that's in here that I think is missing from most people's understanding of why is it that the agencies don't bring this on board. It's because actually it costs time and money to put in place, and that therefore it becomes a moral, ethical piece and a thing about leadership of, we are going to make that change happen. And there are leaders out
Yeah.
there, there's no doubt about it, and especially in the non-diving space, where, as an example I often give, in hospitals in the States, where they've got huge litigation cases, and the litigation happens because the parents, the family, or the patients themselves have been harmed by the healthcare service, and all they want to have is a sorry, some level of compensation, and some validation that the same event won't happen again.
Mm.
And because they don't get that from the hospitals, because the lawyers get involved, what happens, it gets escalated and it gets really expensive. And so these hospitals have turned around and said, you know what, all we need to do is say sorry and look at how things have changed. And their litigation went through the floor and their organizational learning went through the roof,
Mm.
because now they were finding out what's going on. So it takes leadership to turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to make that step. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to raise the bar in terms of our competencies for our instructors.
Okay.
And that's not an easy game to do in a numbers thing where the margins are so small, and it's about how do we make the biggest profit rather than or actually not lose and not go bankrupt.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Might have to be a non-agency additional training level. That gives people a degree of kudos or public
Hmm.
recognition or something along those lines. Where you're
Yeah,
like, hey,
and so
if
yeah,
you had a choice between two instructors and on paper they look the same, except one of them has an advanced leadership or some type of group management or safety
yeah.
management, that's the one you'd pick, wouldn't you?
Well, you would if you were educated. And that's that again. So that then becomes the piece where all of the agencies are part of, say, the World Recreational Scuba Training Council. So therefore, they must all be equal in the skills that they deliver.
Hmm.
So there's an educational piece that's needed. And one of the things that I've recognized is those who come on to the human factors training are intrinsically motivated to get better. They're not compliance motivated to get ticks certs or whatever. It's how do I improve myself and get better. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
it, and
hear
it
you.
doesn't matter whether or not they're open water or an instructor trainer.
I hear you. And I've also seen, and again, don't take me the wrong way on this. I've seen people that have followed your training, that have read your books. They they will quote your material, and I'm like, yeah, it sounds familiar, but they don't apply it. They might think they apply it, but they don't
Yeah,
really apply it. It's there at an
the veneer
intellectual
level.
level
Yeah,
rather than an
practical.
experience or practical level. So,
Yeah,
so how do we transition from that? I mean, I'm not saying don't read your books. I'm saying this is a great place to be, but it needs to be somewhere translated into something more practical, and that's not a student's job or necessarily an instructor's job. That needs to come from a higher up a training element within the
yes.
chain, really. Um,
So
and I
that
don't have
works
the answer.
inside.
I've just had the
Yeah,
desire, really.
I don't either. And part of that is because we've got these two parallel systems. You've got the training system and then you've got the fun diving system. And
Mm,
once you're outside the training system, there is no real feedback and quality management that happens.
yeah.
And so we've got to create that culture where we can actually say, you know what, that doesn't quite look right. It doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain it? And create the environment where we teach people how to challenge and we teach people how to be challenged and take that critique when it comes in.
Okay.
It's a multifaceted problem that needs to be addressed.
Hmm. Wow. Okay.
I mean, even
That's what.
just as a simple one, as
Go
you
on.
can start this right at the open water level, I've got a dive center in Dallas. They've just been running an open water class, and one of their instructors is saying, when there are two students doing skills, why can't we get one of the open water divers to help the other one when they've got a problem? It might be about putting
Hmm.
a hand on their arm or, just basic teamwork right at the open water level. But so,
Yeah.
you can introduce these in very simple ways. And one of the things we talked about beforehand is something for the show notes is about practical things that can be done even at the open water level that brings some of this stuff together.
Yeah. 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 Well, definitely some food for thought there. Um, and who knows? Who knows? Maybe one day we'll write a program together and see what we can do with it. But I think in reality, I mean, I'm joking, but I think in reality, it's going to take something like that. It's going to take someone with your vast theoretical knowledge on this, and someone like myself who's in the water
Mm,
every week, dealing with students, dealing with instructors, and wanting to do it differently. Because I genuinely feel somewhat concerned at the future of diving education. Like if I look at the UK, for example, um, most senior instructors have either retired, started doing something else part time, moving to Mexico. I'm like, wow, that's a because these people bring experience with them. They've done this 10,
mhm,
20, 30 years. They've made a lot of mistakes. They've done a lot of things right. Then they realized why they did the things right, and they realized why they made a mistake. And they have that golden nugget to share with the next generation, and it's not being shared,
mhm.
unfortunately, not enough.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a real miss there. But
Oh, totally. I mean, the experience that happens underwater is just phenomenal.
yeah,
I think as long as people have I'm going to say a safe environment and they see what the underwater world is like, this is very different to what I was expecting. And it's a very cool place to be.
okay, all
But
right,
yes, we can have a discussion about what a program might look like.
sounds good.
The program itself is relatively easy. Getting it into the formal training system is much harder.
Okay. Well, why don't we
So
talk a little bit after the call and see
absolutely.
what we can do? For now, thank you very much for your time, buddy.
No, thank you,
Um,
Ollie.
and if you want to do something like this again, just give us a shout. When this gets sent out, I hope there's going to be lots of questions and a lot of interactions. And if people come with a specific request or like an angle that we keep
Yes,
seeing repeating in the questions, I will definitely get back to you and we'll definitely do a follow up.
absolutely, absolutely. And it's much easier to answer specific questions to people than it is provide generalities because people sit there going, "Oh, I already do that," or "I do," and then we
Mm.
dig into a conversation. They go, "Oh, right, okay, so there's the nugget that I can pull out of this."
Yeah, 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 yeah. Cool.
So thanks very much for the invite, and yeah, next time.
Thanks, buddy.